Welcome to our class. In this class, I would like to talk about floats, and I'm specifically covering floats on an image. Floats on containers will be covered in the next class. Float is a CSS property, and it enables you to place the element on the right or left of its outer container, whatever that outer container might be. Now, some properties, such as font size, margins, padding, it doesn't matter where that container is. Those properties will work the same regardless. However, floats will work differently depending on what's on top of it, what's on the bottom of it. So they are very specific to the layout of your code. Sometimes they will work beautifully. Sometimes there will be some issues and you'll have to write some code to work with those issues, such as clearing those floats. It's always a good idea to apply one style at a time and then look to see what's happening rather do everything at once. Now, what we have in the HTML document is what is called the normal flow. So as we lay code on the page, the browser reads it from the top down. So everything stacks on top of each other. So here in our main container, I have a paragraph, an image, a list, a div, a paragraph, and then my footers down here. Everything stacks on top of each other. So if I look at my code, here we are, the header first, the navigation, we'll cover navigation later. There's my paragraph, here's my image, here's my unordered list, etc. If I were to code in an inline style, notice everything is smack to the right of it. So what floats enable us to do is to change the normal flow of the page. Now, if this doesn't look good, obviously, to make it look nice, we might need something done to that image, such as placing a margin or padding on the right of it. However, if I set my float to right, it looks perfectly wonderful. And this is the point I'm trying to make. Depending on how you lay things out, you might not need to make any adjustments. However, there are times that you might, and it's not because of the CSS. It's because of what's around the object that you're working with. It has to do with the page layout. All right, so let's go back, and I'm going to do another thing. I'm going to change the height to 300. Now, notice, see this paragraph? Anything under will continue to wrap. And now our footer is actually coming up close. It makes a difference with respect to where the float is and what's around the float. If we were to change the height back to its default, now the paragraph is underneath because there's no more room for it to wrap. So that's the concept of this float. You may need to clear it, you may not need to clear it. So first, let's move this around. Now, how would we do that? As I said earlier, either margin or padding. I kind of like margin. So we already have a style here of 50 pixels. What it does, it puts some distance between here. Now, supposing I wanted this part to be underneath the image. What I would need to do, I would need to clear that float. So here again, depending on your layout, there are times when you might need to clear it, and there are times when it will naturally wrap itself. So if I were to access this div here, and I will just do this inline, because the float is set on the left, I will set the clear property to the left, and now we see that indeed it is underneath the image. Should I wish to move this down a little, I need to put some breaks on top of this, or I could set a top margin So this is the concept of floats on an image. It allows you to place what is underneath in the code. So we're looking at the normal flow of the document. This image is here. It allows you to change the normal flow. So if the image is floated on the left, then what is underneath it wraps alongside the image. If the image is floated on the right, what is underneath it wraps alongside it. If the image is floated on the right, and now I have to change this, it will wrap around it on the left. However, when you look at this web page, you see the unordered list on the left and you see the image on the right. You might think to yourself that in the HTML, the unordered list was coded first. That is not correct. It only looks that way because we have set the float property on this image to right. So here, the unordered list is actually underneath the image. It's not on the top. So when you're laying out your page, please be aware of that. So the rule of thumb is what is underneath the image will wrap either to the right or the left, depending on whether you set the float property to right or to left. I'm going to use this image here, and I'm going to put it in my header section. And there it is. This is a background image, by the way. So here we are, and this is the normal flow. There is some padding set on this container. And I'm going to use this image to demonstrate the CSS position property. The position property also allows us to take an object out of the normal flow and place it somewhere. Positioning works well for navigation and for ads. I do not recommend it for page layout. It is very difficult to use. Floats are used for page layout, for making columns, and that will be covered in our next class. So if I were to set the position property to absolute, and I will do this inline. Now I also need to set a left and a top. So generally with position, you set the left and top, you can set the right and top, or you can do the same with the bottom, depending on whether you want left or right. In order to use positioning, you have to indicate what type of position, a left coordinate and a right coordinate. So if I were to save this, now notice what happened. Technically, this is no longer inside my container. Notice the padding is back to normal now. It is no longer inside the container. It is on top of my web page. The only way that you can overlap one thing on top of another in the HTML document is with absolute positioning and with fixed positioning. That is a rule of thumb, and it is a good thing to remember. That actually takes it not only out of the normal flow, but it puts it essentially in a plane all by itself. So think of the web page as on the outer plane or a back plane, and this is on top of it. So we're in another dimension here. Now let's adjust these coordinates. I'll go to 150, 150, and there it is. Here again, you can see it's on top of content. Now, if I were to change my type of positioning from absolute to fixed, the same effect is there. And I don't have a scroll bar, so let me zoom. And what fixed positioning does, it stays there. It's fixed. And the content will scroll underneath it. So the next time you're on a website and you see those annoying ads on the right that don't go away, they very likely have used fixed positioning for that. So that is what fixed positioning is all about. We also have relative positioning. Relative positioning is very useful, but you don't need to use it unless you need to use it. And I'll explain that shortly. Now we're back inside. Relative does not take it out of the normal flow. We're still inside the container. You can see it's pushing a little outside of the container, or where the background is. However, we're not really overlapping. Okay, relative means it's relative to where it is. Therefore, you don't need to really set things relative. Where relative comes in very handy is if the parent container, which is the header, so if I were to give the header a position of relative, and I were to change this to absolute and save that, now this will be absolutely positioned to its relative parent. This is generally where you use absolute positioning. Now you can see, now this is absolute. It is no longer in this container. It is positioned with respect to its parent container starting right here. This is done a lot in navigation. So if we were to remove this style, this would be positioned essentially to the body or the browser window. And you can see it moved up. Let's take a look at some examples of using float with images. Here we have the Palomar page, and we have some images and text wrapping up next to them. Very nice effect. A very useful tool in every browser is the inspect tool. The terminology might be inspect element. And if you right click on any element and go all the way down toward the bottom to find the inspect command, it will open up a dialog. It takes a while to learn how to use this. So if I were to hover over that, you see underneath it is highlighting the HTML code. In order to learn how people do things on their websites, you can use this feature. And on the right, it shows you the CSS. So here I can even see the image. Here it shows me, it has a class, it has a source, all right, they forgot the alt attribute, but over here you can see the styles. You can see that the styles for this image in this website are being applied to the image element. You can see it right there, and these are the different styles being applied. This is a very, very useful tool. It also can help you debugging your own code.